My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome to the Patrick Christys Show with me, Martin Dorby. Loads coming up in the next 2 hours, including the King's speech came out today. Does it get the royal seal approval, or was it a right royal load of hot air? Next, Rishi promising to clamp down on crime. Life means life. Grooming gangs at last getting the attention it deserves. But trouble is, do we believe him? Next up, of course, the Great Unwashed took some time out from gluing themselves to pavements, and they turned up protesting against Not My King. We'll have all the latest on that. And finally, as we go towards Armistice Day and the protests still look like they're going ahead, as it emerges, half of the organisers back Hamas. We're asking, is it time to ban them? And of course, this is your show. Please get in touch with all of your views and comments. gbviews@gbnews.com. Get them to me. I'll read out the best ones. But first, here's your news update with Polly Middlehurst.
Martin, thank you and good afternoon to you. Well, the top story today is following the King's speech in Parliament today. MPs have been debating what's been said in the Commons. And the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, said the only fight left in the government was the fight for their own skin in reaction. That comes as King Charles outlined the Prime Minister's legislative agenda earlier on. It included bills on tougher sentences for murderers and a ban on leaseholds for new houses in England and Wales. But Sir Keir Starmer said the Conservatives were severing Britain's future and that the change the country needed was from Tory decline to Labour renewal.
Today was a missed opportunity We needed a King's Speech that would draw a line under 13 years of Tory decline, a King's Speech for national renewal and a serious plan for growth. But instead, we have a party so devoid of leadership, it is happy to follow a Home Secretary who describes homelessness as a lifestyle choice.
But the Prime Minister's been hitting back, saying the King's Speech will change the country for the better.
This King's Speech is about what this government is about, taking long-term decisions to build a brighter future for our country. It builds on foundations that were far stronger than they were just a year ago. Inflation falling and on track to be halved.
In other news, Wales's First Minister says WhatsApp messages between Welsh Government officials relating to the pandemic may have been deleted. Mark Drayford was answering questions after messages on the platform between ministers at Westminster emerged at the COVID inquiry. There's been some controversy in Scotland as the former First Minister there, Nicola Sturgeon's message data, had also been deleted. Mr Drakeford admitted a deletion may have taken place, but said he never deleted any himself, as he does not use the messaging app. International news, and the government is due to hold an emergency COBRA meeting very soon to discuss the impact of the Israel-Hamas conflict on the United Kingdom. Today marks a month since the Hamas terror attack in Israel on October the 7th. Hundreds of people gathered outside Downing Street in London and joined major cities across the world, hosting a memorial vigil for those who lost their lives in the conflict. And Israel's defence forces, meanwhile, have released footage of the destruction of a tunnel in Gaza, which they say was a Hamas structure. It says its forces have surrounded Gaza City now, home to a third of the enclave's 2.3 million people. Meanwhile, video has been released of Palestinians holding white flags walking south in Gaza City. The Israeli military has said it's allowed them safe passage to go on somewhere else. Now, Captain Sir Tom Moore's daughter has lost an appeal against the demolition of an unauthorised spa at her home. Hannah Ingram Moore and her husband had appealed against the demolition order by Central Bedfordshire Council. They used the Captain Tom Foundation name on the first proposal, but revised plans were then turned down. The organisation, which was founded in June 2020 in honour of Sir Tom, is currently being investigated by the Charity Commission. Grocery price inflation has fallen to single digits for the first time in 16 months. Market research group Kantar says it's the 8th consecutive decline since the figure peaked in March. However, customers are only seeing year-on-year price falls in a number of categories, including butter, pasta and milk. And UK house prices rose for the first time in 6 months in October, marking the first monthly increase since March. According to the Halifax, the average house price jumped by around £3,000 month on month, the mortgage lender saying prices rose by 1.1% on average compared to a fall of 0.3% in September. The typical UK home was valued at almost £282,000 in October. That's up by £3,000 on the previous month. Now, a breakthrough drug is being offered to thousands of women in England to reduce their risk of developing breast cancer. The NHS says around 300,000 postmenopausal women in England who are at moderate or high risk will be offered the drug anastrozole. Trials of the drug have shown it reduces breast cancer cases by 49% over 11 years among eligible women. That's the news. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Thank you, Polly. So to our top story this hour, the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer, have clashed over what was revealed in the King's Speech earlier today. King Charles set out the government's plans for the coming year, which included higher jail terms for serious offenders and a plan to stop children from smoking. When debating the speech, Rishi Sunak told the Commons that his government was about taking long-term decisions to build a brighter future for this country. But the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, accused the Prime Minister of putting party first, the country second, in the plans he set out in the speech. Well, joining us now is our political editor, Christopher Hope. Christopher, high drama, throwing mud at each other, as you'd imagine. Starmer saying Britain is ready for change, and Rishi warning the Labour government means higher inflation, more debt, more strikes, higher immigration and closer ties to the EU. What were your takeaways from today's event?
That's right, we're back to politics as usual to a degree, aren't we, I think, Martin? I mean, there was calls there for the PM, Rishi Sunak, to fire Suella Braverman, of course. There's the remarks over the weekend when she said that having a tent if you're homeless was a lifestyle choice, certainly wound up the left, probably what Suella Braverman was not unhappy to do, because, of course, she retweeted an article saying she might be doing that in the King's speech. Nothing about that. There are areas, though, about tackling antisocial behaviour, allowing police to move on, people at home, and stop aggressive begging. That's as far as it goes in terms of there. But I think overall, this is 21 bills. We're seeing a quarter of them are saying that on the criminal justice space. That's interesting, I think. So the government has got a good story to tell about cutting crime to its lowest level. I think it's the areas there, the criminal justice bill, new powers to tackle a complex economic crime, grass and nettle on short sentences, no more people being jailed for less than 12 months. Now that's an area which successive Labour and Tory administrations have not gone there. They are trying to do this, and to the credit of the government, they are trying to tackle these big issues, looking almost beyond the election and take on these areas which other governments have failed to do. They do want to bring all these 21 bills onto the statute book before the next election. I think what we are seeing here is a clear indication that he's going to go quite long, the PM, Mr Sunak, into late next year, maybe as late as January 2025, before having this general election. He's trying to put as much distance as he can do, Martin, between the chaos of the Truss administration 40 months ago and when he goes to the country. So I wonder whether we are seeing the first indication that we could be facing a January 2025 general election.
Yeah, you probably expect them to delay. I mean, what kind of turkey would vote for Christmas at the moment? But on the particular issue of crime, this will resonate, of course, with a lot of GB News viewers. Tough on crime, life means life. But then Starmer quick to point out that actually under the Tory government, there has seen lots of early release of violent criminals. In fact, Chris, we saw 4 jihadists quietly released last week. Do you think this will wash with the electorate, or is it just red meat to throw out and hope they buy it?
Yeah, I think the government's saying they're trying to deal with it with a booming jail population. The jails were full a couple of weeks ago, if you remember. So they're looking, aren't they, with the sentencing bill. They're trying to make sure that life means life for the most serious offenders, the most serious rapists, murderers, terrorists, and particularly when there's measures of sadism or sexual abuse involved, when they can actually say, well, you can't come out even after half your term is served. There's a victims and prisoners bill, of course, allowing ministers to be tougher on early release on parole. Big problem there, because ministers often get blamed when you have criminals who are being released too early. There's a bill called the Terrorism Protection of Premises Bill, the Martin's Law, to try and make sure that big venues can protect people if there's a terrorism attack after those Manchester Arena attacks in 2017. I think there's a government here trying to do the right thing, maybe. I mean, you heard, didn't you, Keir Starmer talking about the lack of giving up on public service. He says sticking plasters, more division. Ed Davey, Liberal Democrat leader, saying it's a tired government, run out of ideas. But this is a two-part play for me. You've seen today, nothing of surprise in today's legislation plan. They're looking into late next year. That's a long period of more of Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister. The second part of that play is going to be the autumn statement in 2 weeks' time. Will there be any space over tax cuts? What is the red meat he might try and throw to GB News viewers concerned about who to vote for the next election? I think that's what we're seeing. Today's part 1, but part 2 could be quite meaty indeed.
And Starmer was quick to go on the attack there. 25 straight tax rises, he pointed out, under Starmer, under Rishi, beg your pardon. Yeah. But Christopher, another thing that came out was Brexit. Rishi playing hard on that, saying a Starmer government is closer ties to the European Union. He talked about the spectre of an additional 100,000 immigrants per year, of course, under that EU returns deal. Do you think Brexit will still resonate on the doorsteps in the next general election, or has this kind of been put to bed?
What Labour are doing with Brexit is quite interesting. They're using that expression, take back control, but applying that to everyday public services. They're applying the language of that vote in 2016, Martin, and applying it to giving people more control over their local planning laws or other areas. And that's why I think there's almost a redefining of what the Brexit vote was about. But they are trying to deliver this Brexit dividend in the government. There's the Trade Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a long term. That's an act that will allow the UK to get access to new markets in Canada, Japan, Peru, Malaysia and Brunei, and allow Asia-Pacific countries to bid for more work in the UK. And this idea of being a global country, and also there's a ban on live animal exports, another issue which you feel you couldn't do within the European Union. In future, all animals will be slaughtered in the UK, and not many, only a few thousand of these live animal exports, but that will stop as things stand under these measures. So there is an attempt here by Mr Sunak to try and find the benefits from Brexit, because many people who voted for Brexit back in 2016 do feel this government has failed to grasp those opportunities.
OK, Chris Hope, live from Westminster. Thank you very much for that update. Now, of course, the economy was a large part of the King's speech, covering securing Britain's economic future, ensuring energy security and bringing down inflation. I'm joined again in the studio now by GBNews business and economics editor Liam Halligan. Liam, we touched upon energy security and the trade deal with the CPTPP before the break. What else caught your eye today?
Well, just to finish off on the CPTPP, this is a big comprehensive trade deal with 11 countries around what we call the Pacific Rim. Asia, the sort of citadel of future global growth, where all the population growth, a big chunk of it is going to be in the future. And when we can only sign these trade deals because we're outside the European Union, of course, inside the European Union, Brussels negotiates our trade deals. And when you've got 27 countries, there's no way they're going to sign a trade deal with a complex organisation like the CPTPP. Too many competing interests. But Kemi Badenoch, our Trade Secretary, pulled it off. She's been derided, saying it's not important. But it is important, I would say. And let me just finish telling GB News viewers and listeners about the size of the CPTPP area. The CPTPP 11 nations, they currently account for, if you add the UK to them now, 16% of the world economy, of global GDP, which is the same as the European Union, 27 countries in the European Union. So we're now part of a bloc the size of the European Union. Having said that, the European Union, by 2050, according to the World Bank, they'll go from 16% of global GDP to just 10% of global GDP, because Europe isn't growing very fast. It's the slowest growing continent in the world, apart from Antarctica. But the CPTPP 11 nations plus the UK, we're going to go from 16% of global GDP to 25% of global GDP. So 15 percentage point
But I read in The Guardian, Liam, that this deal was piffling. It was tiny. We were cutting off our own noses by not doing a deal with the EU, and this one, in comparison, is small beer.
Well, we have done a deal with the EU. We have a tariff-free, quota-free deal with the EU, which is a pretty amazing deal. There are some frictions in it, but that's why our exports to the EU are higher now than they were when we were in the EU. And a lot of people that voted Remain don't want to hear that, but it's axiomatically true. The Office of Budget Responsibility has admitted it in some fine print in the last couple of days, but they're still predicting that there's going to be a massive fall-off in trade because we're members of the European Union over the next 10 to 15 years. I don't quite know how they're going to work that one out. So it strikes me that even though we're outside the European Union, UK trade is doing pretty well. And the Prime Minister wanted to stress that because, of course, we need an Act of Parliament to join the CPTPP. That's why it's part of the Queen's, the King's speech. So easy to get that wrong, isn't it? And just on real estate, the property market, leasehold reform, that's really, really important. You're not going to be allowed to do a new build and put a leasehold on it. Yeah. It has to be freehold. That's absolutely fantastic news. I've personally been campaigning on that for many, many years. You've had a lot of people buying new builds. They have these doubling things on, so your ground rent doubles every 5 years until your house becomes worthless because the ground rent is more than the mortgage. Completely usurious. So I'm glad that's been done. And also, when you renew your lease, rather than getting another 100 years or something, you're now going to get, as standard, another 999 years.
That's good news.
So that means your leasehold effectively becomes a freehold. So two things there. I do think the oil and gas thing is the headline economically. The fact that the government is going to have an annual round of new oil and gas licences in the North Sea. The North Sea is still incredibly important to us. I don't think you can just end North Sea oil and gas. There are 300 licences operational. Half of them expire by 2030. We still get, Martin, 75% of our energy from oil and gas in this country, and we get huge shares of our oil and gas from the North Sea.
Storm was very quick to point out, though, this doesn't mean a penny off of British bills, whereas Rishi was claiming this new deal will save us up to 15 grand a year. Where's the truth?
Well, the truth is it depends, doesn't it? You'd expect an economist to say, if you have your own homegrown oil and gas, you know, you're not as exposed to the mercy of global markets as you otherwise would be in a very tight sort of geopolitical situation. And I think also it's worth saying, so you would think that in the end, oil and gas from the North Sea is likely, I mean, there are global markets for these things.
Yeah.
But if you've got your own oil and gas, when the Russians aren't pumping gas and the OPEC exporters cartel is limiting oil supplies, and it could turn really nasty, let's see what happens in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas. It does make sense economically to use your own homegrown oil and gas. And it absolutely makes sense from a carbon emissions point of view. If we import gas, liquefied natural gas from the US and put it in a diesel-fuelled tanker, crosses the 3,000 odd miles across the Atlantic, compared to taking gas out of the North Sea, that gas from the North Sea, compared to the liquefied natural gas from America, the LNG from America has 6 times the carbon emissions of the homegrown gas.
Yeah.
But using the LNG from America means we can tell ourselves, oh, we're not pumping oil and gas. But actually, in terms of the environment, it's much better to use North Sea gas rather than importing gas 3,000 miles away.
And we import, Liam, 19.6 billion quid's worth of gas every year. On what planet is it a good idea to import it when we could make our own?
Well, we are a net oil and gas importer. We have been for a number of years. A lot of our imported gas comes from Norway, actually, which is a lot less carbon intensive.
It's the same field.
They're similar fields. It's part of the North Sea, but it comes through the Langeland pipeline. It comes into the northeast. It's the longest undersea gas pipeline in the world. That doesn't take any carbon because, of course, you're pumping the gas. It's when you convert the gas into liquid and cross the Atlantic. That's what is really carbon intensive. And since the war between Russia and Ukraine, we've been importing huge amounts of gas from the US and indeed from Qatar on ships. That's what's really carbon intensive. And if you are an environmentalist, and I've got a lot of sympathy with their cause, just understand it's much less carbon intensive to use our own gas than to import it on ships from around the world.
Liam Halligan, excellent as ever. Thank you. Great analysis. Well, not everyone in Westminster was enjoying the pomp and pageantry as King Charles opened Parliament. Anti-monarchy group Republic have been demonstrating today. GB News London reporter Liesl Hartle was in Westminster to tell us more.
There were about 300 protesters from the campaign group Republic earlier, all around here on the corner of Parliament Square. And that was as the King and the royal procession came down past us. They had banners saying, "Not my King," and placards. And they were chanting things like, "Down with the crown" and "Not my King." Now, this group is calling for what they say is to get rid of the monarchy. And they want everybody that's in the parliamentary system, within the system in this country, to all be elected. I spoke to the CEO, Graham Smith, of the organisation this morning, and this is what he had to say.
Well, the big difference we would make is shifting power from government to parliament and from parliament to people, so the country would be more democratic. Everybody in the parliament would be elected and representative and accountable, and we would have a head of state who could represent us, who is one of us and chosen by us and accountable to us. And that just makes our democracy better, and it makes decision making better, and it shifts more power into the hands of the voter.
So this organisation has been going for 40 years. They're also calling for to scrap the House of Lords as well. They say they want everybody that's in the system to be elected.
That makes you wonder if any of these people have got jobs. No doubt they'll be gluing themselves to pavements tomorrow. We are watching and listening to GB News. Coming up in just a moment, we'll be discussing the Prime Minister's crime crackdown with the former Met police detective. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, standing in for Patrick Christys, and this is Britain's News Channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Welcome back to the Patrick Christys Show. You're watching and listening to me, Martin Daubney, covering for Pat on GB News, bringing you all the latest news, debate and analysis right through until 6 o'clock. Now, another one of the key issues in the King's speech today was the emphasis on criminal justice reform, as it was announced that killers convicted of the most horrific murders should expect whole-life orders, as Rishi Sunak's government attempts to beef up its law and order policies. The government also wants prolific killers like nurse Lucy Letby, who refused to attend her sentencing hearing, to be forced to face their victims' families in the dock. Others like Jordan McSweeney and Thomas Cashman can also expect to serve their day of sentencing. Well, I'm joined now by former Metropolitan Police Detective Peter Blexley, my favourite common sense copper. It's always a pleasure to have you on GB News, Peter. So you've probably heard this many, many times before over the years, haven't you? Prime ministers, politicians talking tough on crime. Do you believe Rishi will actually do it?
Well, of course, the Tory party built their reputation over many decades of being the party of law and order. And back when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, that was a claim I think that they could actually hang on to and say, yes, we are. That mantle has slipped a lot in recent years But I'm pleased to hear today that there will be another look at this whole life orders and who will be eligible for them. And we hear that it's going to be murderers with a particular sadistic element to the killing or a sexual element. Well, that, of course, would mean that McSweeney, who unbelievably had his sentence cut this week, would probably have got a full life term. So that has to be welcomed, together with people like Colin Pitchfork, a name that's been in the news recently. He raped and murdered 2 teenage girls in separate incidents, and he has been in front of the parole board. I'm sure that if this legislation finds its way onto the statute book, then killers like Pitchfork will serve a whole life term, and I'd be very supportive of that.
And Peter, plans as well, promises to clamp down on grooming gangs. A lot of people watching this show will think that is long, long overdue.
It most certainly is. And there's an awful lot of senior police officers who need to hang their heads in shame because they were too scared to confront the uncomfortable truth. They were too timid and frightened to be accused of racism because they would not go into particular communities that had a penchant for this revolting, disgusting behaviour whereby they plied young girls with drink, drugs, groomed them, raped them, sexually abused them for years and got away with it for years, sometimes forever. So beefing up the legislation, having a political will that will put a size 11 up the rear end of any senior police officer who can't be courageous enough to confront the uncomfortable truth has to be a good thing.
But doesn't that bring us to another problem that we face in policing, or at least in the College of Policing, Peter? We talk about this often, and that is it's OK to talk tough. It's OK to say, let's put a boot through a door or worse. But the fact of the matter is, it seems that the policing establishment has been consumed by wokery, the kind of wokery, in fact, that means that cops and lawmakers are too afraid to be called racist to actually do any of this stuff, and they're not actually putting it down on the beats. Whose fault is that? Is it the bobbies, or is it the orders coming down to them from the top brass?
Well, Martin the Carpenter Daubney has just hit the nail firmly on the head. There is a liberal, woke, kind of pseudo-intellectual attitude that pollutes so much of senior policing. And that, of course, filters down, because any other cop who aspires to be senior in policing has to buy in to the whole mantra, to the whole mindset. And of course, these senior police officers are so disconnected from the front line, from the rough and tumble of response policing and other frontline specialisms, that they live quite clearly in cloud cuckoo land. And that the public are not daft. The public know this, they realise it, and they want policing to be robust, to be professional, to be firm, and so that we try and stem this ever-increasing tide of lawlessness, which is just irritating so many people and creating so many victims of crime.
And Peter, as I have you here, of course, all eyes now are on Armistice Day, the planned protest, the Palestinian mob turning up on Saturday. Astonishing scenes last night, the Metropolitan Police asking them to reconsider, asking them nicely to postpone. If you were in control, what would you do this Saturday?
Kindly bear with me because I may give you an answer that might surprise you somewhat. Sir Mark Rowley could not have handled this any worse. I actually would have allowed the march to take place. As unsavoury as that may seem, it is scheduled to start after the 11th hour on the 11th day of the 11th month. It's not going anywhere near Whitehall, the Cenotaph, Parliament Square, and I would rather have a mob where I knew they were going to be, where I could police them properly. If this march does get suspended, postponed, banned, whatever it may be, we quite potentially would be confronted in London with mobs of people and the police having no idea whatsoever where they're going to go. Rowley has managed to cheese everybody off here. He's cheesed off the far right, who have had a notorious leader call people to arms on Saturday. He's cheesed off the protesters, and quite frankly, this is a dreadful situation now. If he goes to the Home Secretary and asks her to ban this march, then I have got serious concerns as to what might happen in London on Saturday.
OK, Peter Blexley, thank you once again for speaking common sense. If we have people like you in control, mate, we might have more than half a fighting chance. OK, you're watching and listening to GB News. Lots more to come before 5 o'clock, including a vigil to mark a month since the Hamas terror attack on Israel has been held outside Downing Street. We have an update on the conflict live from Tel Aviv with Mark White. But first, here's your news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Martin, thanks very much indeed. Well, let's bring you up to date with events in the Commons today. And I can tell you MPs have been debating the King's speech today amid great pomp and ceremony. That began in the House of Commons. Then, of course, it was the first King's speech in 70 years. The King outlining the government's plans for the year ahead, including tougher sentencing for the country's most serious offenders and a ban on leaseholds for new houses in England and Wales. His Majesty also set out legislation to mandate annual oil and gas licensing in the North Sea, stating that new fossil fuel sites will support the country's transition to net zero. Well, the government is due to hold an emergency Cobra meeting today. That's going to be chaired by the Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden. They'll be discussing the impact of the Israel-Hamas conflict on the UK. Today, of course, marking a month since the October the 7th Hamas terror attack on Israel. And hundreds of people have been gathering outside Downing Street today as London joined major cities around the world, all holding a memorial vigil for those who've lost their lives in the conflict. And Israel's military has released footage of the destruction of a tunnel in Gaza, which they say was a Hamas structure. It says its forces have now surrounded Gaza City, home to a third of the enclave's 2.3 million people. Meanwhile, video has been released as well of Palestinians holding up white flags, walking south in Gaza City, the Israeli military saying it's allowed them passage to move to safety. More on all those stories by heading to our website, gbnews.com.
And thanks for that update, Polly. Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Martin Daubney on GB News, filling in for Patrick Christys, bringing you all of the latest news, debate and analysis right and through till 6 p.m. Now, Israel says it's open to a pause in Gaza fighting to allow for humanitarian aid. Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel would consider tactical little pauses to let aid in and allow for the exit of hostages. But the Israeli leader reiterated his country's rejection of a ceasefire without the release of all people being held captive and hinted at indefinite control of Gaza.
I think Israel will, for an indefinite period, will have the overall security responsibility, because we've seen what happens when we don't have it. When we don't have that security responsibility, what we have is the eruption of Hamas terror on a scale that we couldn't imagine.
Well, GB News security editor Mark White is in Tel Aviv and joins us now live. So Mark, some good news there in terms of some brief humanitarian pauses, but Netanyahu adamant that if this were to go through, he wants to take control of Palestine, of Gaza.
Yes, which I think will be of concern to those who are determined to try to stop Israel reoccupying Gaza, but that seems to be the upshot of what Benjamin Netanyahu was suggesting there, that they would have overall control of the security in Gaza going forward, at least for the medium term and perhaps into the long term, depending on what they can do to try to sort the governance of Gaza out. But it's likely that in trying to control the security in Gaza, it will be a very difficult operation going forward, because there will, whatever the avowed aim of Israel is, there will still be at the end of this some remnants of Hamas left in Gaza. There will be amongst some of the population radicalization through what they've gone through in recent weeks, and so they will effectively be fighting a low-level insurgency while trying to control Gaza. It is a very difficult operation, I think, for the Israelis going forward, but I think they probably view it as the lesser of two evils. not to be in Gaza and controlling the security situation means that effectively whatever is left of Hamas at the end of this would be allowed to regroup, rearm and try to attack Israel again. And that's why Benjamin Netanyahu is insistent that, you know, there will be control of the situation in Gaza once this war is at an end.
And Mark, we've seen some very moving tributes from within Israel to mark the fact it's 1 month on since Hamas terrorists invaded Israel and conducted their atrocities. We also saw similar scenes at Downing Street. What's the mood amongst the Israeli public on this important anniversary of 1 month on since that invasion?
Well, certainly at the outbreak of this war, when the events were very raw indeed. I mean, they still are raw, of course they are. But even more so a few weeks ago, there was overwhelming support for the Israeli military to go in and take out Hamas. However, the hostage situation complicated matters, and a recent poll that was carried out suggested that as many as half the Israeli population would have preferred a pause. But we are where we are. The military has gone in. They are determined to apply pressure on Hamas. That's the way they see as ultimately securing the release of those hostages. So they're pushing forward. They have encircled Gaza City, and at some point, in earnest, they will push in that operation to take on Hamas in its stronghold. I should say, though, when the people of Israel were pausing at 11 o'clock this morning to remember the horrific events of the 7th of October, then true to form, Hamas lobbed more rockets over into southern Israel right at 11 o'clock, clearly timed just to coincide with that minute's silence.
And Mark, we've just heard from Rishi Sunak in Parliament reflecting after the King's speech, and he announced to the public the fantastic news that over 100 British nationals have now got out of Gaza via the Rafah crossing. So alas, some fantastic news for British citizens.
It is, but we've got to temper that with the knowledge that around 100 at least British nationals are still trapped in Gaza, and it's a very precarious situation down on the border with Egypt, with that Rafah crossing being closed for quite a bit of the weekend, because the Israelis and the Egyptians were very concerned about Hamas using these ambulance convoys, taking severely injured citizens to Egypt to treat them, was being commandeered effectively by Hamas to put its fighters across into Egypt. So that led to the closure of the crossing again, and we know that there was about 100 or so, just under, who were on a list to go over the weekend who didn't make it through that day. So they've obviously been rescheduled for other days. It's hoped that if they can keep the crossing open, that in the days ahead they will be able to get the remainder of those British nationals and thousands of other foreign nationals that are in Gaza out as well. And all of the while, the aid trucks are coming in, not to the degree that the aid agencies would want them to. It's averaging, we're told, about 33 a day at the moment, which is way below the 500 a day when there wasn't a war raging.
OK, Mark White, live from Tel Aviv on the 1 month anniversary of the Hamas invasion of Israel. Thanks for joining us. Now, coming up, 78-year-old Jim Henderson, an army veteran in the Royal Corps of Signals, was reportedly pushed and punched as he tried to pack up the Poppy Scotland stall. We'll head to Edinburgh in just a moment to get the latest on this utter outrage. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, standing in for Patrick Christys, and we are Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Welcome back, it's 4:45. You're watching and listening to Martin Dalby on GB News, standing in for Patrick Christys, and I'm bringing you all the latest news, debate and analysis right through until 6 p.m. Now, a Scottish poppy vendor in Edinburgh was the alleged victim of an assault on Saturday after an anti-war protest occupied Edinburgh Waverley Station. 78-year-old Jim Henderson was reportedly pushed and punched as he tried to pack up the Poppy Scotland stall after protesters swarmed into the station. To tell us more is our Scotland reporter, Tony Maguire. Tony, this is a story that has really left many, many people feeling ashamed of how Britain is becoming. Can you bring us up to date on the events? And if we found out, has anybody been apprehended for this yet?
Good afternoon. Well, certainly I'm just going to answer your last question first because that was the first thing that came to my mind this morning. Indeed, we've reached out to British Transport Police to find out, is the investigation undergoing? Is anybody been suspect? Are they working perhaps with National Rail? Of course, this incident took place at Waverley Station, just over to my side here. On Saturday afternoon, it was around 3:30, and Jim Henderson, he had been selling poppies there there. Quite a few people online actually saying that they had bought poppies from him only a couple of days before. You know, nice guy, minding his own business seems to be the general consensus of people I've been speaking to. And then, of course, as one of 8 protests that were happening around Scotland that day, protesters piled in, and as he tried to make his exit, as you say, he was pushed backwards, he split his toe when someone stood on his foot, and he was punched not once but twice. Not exactly the way to treat a veteran.
Yeah, and here's a veteran who served in Northern Ireland, served his country, and by the way, thank you for your service, Mr. Henderson. But seriously, this happened in a place where presumably if you used the wrong pronoun, if you said the wrong thing, the CCTV image must be of the highest quality. In fact, Tony, it's made the front page of the Daily Mail today. The individuals, the perpetrators, are easy to identify, surely, and this is precisely the kind of hate crime that Humza Yousaf should be clamping down on. After all, he's obsessed with hate crimes. So long as they're the right sort of hate crimes, we must surely see some swift action.
Indeed, certainly, you know, Humza Yousaf from his speaking to the press in the last week, you know, he seems to be in favour of peaceful protesting. Obviously, he has very close connections with some Gazans, as well as obviously the saga with his wife's family having just got out of there via the Rafah crossing. But yet, you know, I think that a lot of people will be saying, right, there's a line, we need to respect the peaceful protest. And actually, Poppy Scotland, well, they released a statement and they said something exact to the same effect. They said that, you know, while they respect the rights of people to protest within the law, the safety and welfare of their volunteers is of paramount importance. And of course, then they go into the details of that alleged assault on Saturday. But they did add that our volunteer, Jim, he's safe and well, and we thank those who took the time to look after him because, of course, 3 staff members at Waverley Station, well, they were there on hand. And to be honest, Martin, that was the thing that struck me, was of the hundreds of protesters there, it was 3 railway staff at National Rail at Waverley Station that actually helped him get out of that rather scary-sounding situation.
Well, thank you to those rail workers and thank you to everybody who checked on Mr. Henderson, the very best of British, a veteran selling poppies to raise money for the Royal British Legion, as Patrick Christys indeed has done, to be shoved around like that. And he said, I've never seen anything like it. They blame the British government, the British people and the Jews. This is disgusting. Surely these people must be apprehended and brought to justice, because this is the kind of thing that really divides our society. Thank you, Tony Maguire, for joining us there from Edinburgh Station. Moving on now. Human rights body Amnesty International has called for the government to prevent a ban on this Saturday's pro-Palestinian march on Armistice Day. Well, this comes as the Metropolitan Police says the march is inappropriate and risks violence. It's been uncovered that one of the groups protesting is led by a former Hamas chief, mounting pressure to cancel the event. Oliver Dowden, alongside other MPs, will chair an emergency COBRA meeting to assess the impact of the Israel-Hamas conflict in the UK, potentially banning the planned march. Well, I can now speak to the former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence, Chip Chapman. Hello to you, Chip. Always a pleasure. This is the march that's causing huge consternation. We're seeing the division it's causing there with the assault on a poppy seller, a former army veteran. My question to you is this. With this fresh information emerging in the Daily Telegraph today that half of the groups organising this march have links to Hamas, including Mohammed Sawallah, he's a former Hamas chief who was granted right to remain in Britain. Does that give the powers necessary to ban this march?
No, I don't think so. They're ex-members, and the 2014 government report into one of these members and the group that he's a member of, said that there was no reason that they had anything to say he was other than extreme. And of course, the definition of extremism is a very loose one. They tried in 2016 to have a commission for countering extremism and come up with a definition, and it floundered, as did, for example, the definition of Islamophobia, which we should not go down the route of because we'd have backdoor blasphemy. Now, of course, the thing about all these marches one has to remember is that the Public Order Act 1986 pertains, and that is 6 days in advance. They have to give notice of the route, the time, and what they plan to do. The march on Saturday is actually separated in time and space from all the events of the weekend. So I'm not normally one of these people about the free speech wing of the Free Speech Party, but the only event on Saturday is the 2-minute silence on the 11th hour, 11th day, 11th month. The march, Palestinian March, is 2 hours later. So I'm against banning it for that reason. The main celebration is actually on Sunday the 12th, the National Service and Remembrance at the Cenotaph, organised by the RBL, where the annual Veterans March forming up on Horse Guards Parade, that is on the Sunday. So they're separated in time and space. So unless there is evidence in the next few days through encrypted cloud-based apps or social media chat rooms or things like that, that there is going to be significant violence, then I would at the moment take the view that this should be allowed to go on with any caveats that the police may put upon it, which they can also do under further sections of the Public Order Act 1986.
Well, Chip, that begs two responses. First of all, do we believe or trust the organisers to follow the route and follow the timings? And even if the organisers say that, we can't control the entire mob. And the legislation you mentioned there, the Public Order Act, gives power to cancel gatherings if they have the potential to cause serious public disorder, serious criminal damage, or serious disruption to the life of the community. Well, we've seen a 650% rocket in anti-Semitism in this past month. We saw 29 arrests at the weekend, including for racially aggravated comments. We've seen assault on police officers. We saw death threats issued across the Cenotaph. What more do we need?
Well, I agree with all that, but you can't link all those things to a march. So we know that at least 5 things always pertain when you have these massive events such as is going on in the Middle East. We know that there's a rise in Islamophobia. We know there's a rise in anti-Semitism. We know there's a rise in counterterrorism, internet extremist referrals, online content. We know that there is more people who are given credence into the Channel program, that's the government's Prevent program. And we know that there are people who are reported to Counter-Terrorist Command for extreme views, which may lead to a link with what we call key information store records. That is, those who have a file kept by sort of MI5. All those things are true at the same time. Of course, there might be some disruption at the weekend, and that is what the Met Police yesterday were saying. They'd like people to look at the route and turning out for that reason. I don't think at the moment the scale of that potential dissent is enough to cancel it.
Okay.
I don't want there to be any violence. I'd expect there to be a bit of violence, but not necessarily from the organisers.
OK, thank you, Chip Chapman. We have to leave it there. You're watching and listening to GB News. Coming up, we'll have all the latest reaction to the King's speech, including from a shadow cabinet member. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, and this is Britain's News Channel.
Hello again, I'm Alex Burkle with your latest GB News weather update. Whilst there have been quite a few showers around today, and there will be more to come this week, first we have a spell of wet and windy weather that's going to arrive overnight. That's coming from a frontal system currently waiting out in the Atlantic. We do have a brief ridge of high pressure trying to build across the UK, and that is going to ease and clear away some of the showers, with clear skies developing for a time during the start of the night. That will allow it to turn quite chilly, perhaps some patches of mist and fog, but then it will turn cloudy, wet and windy as this system makes its way in from the west. That will then lift temperatures, so after an initially chilly start to the night, it should be relatively mild when most people wake up on Wednesday morning, but it will be a wet and windy start for many of us. Heavy rain, particularly for western parts of Scotland and northwest England, but that rain does sweep its way eastwards as we go through the day, taking its time to clear parts of the east and southeast, so staying wet here well into the afternoon. Something drier, brighter following in behind, but also blustery showers for parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, and temperatures a little bit lower than today across northern parts, highs in single figures here. As we look towards Thursday, and it's another showery day, it will be breezy at times, particularly around the coast, and watch out for some heavy showers, particularly towards southern coastal areas too. The showers will continue as we go into Friday, starting to ease a little bit, and at the moment, Saturday does look like it will be drier, but no real change to our temperatures. Bye-bye.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows,
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new
It's-
teeth.
I know.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Good afternoon, it's 5 p.m. Welcome to the Patrick Christys Show with me, Martin Dorby. Tons coming up in the next Power Hour. Top of the show, the King's Speech, tough on crime, ban on smoking, ban on zombie knives and drilling for oil. Does it get the royal seal approval or is it right old royal load of hot air? Next up, all eyes, of course, are now on Armistice Day as Palestinian protesters plan to march in London, with details emerging today that half of the groups organising these marches have links to Hamas. We're asking, is it time to ban them? Next, of course, the poppy seller Jim Henderson, who was attacked by that same mob at Edinburgh Station, captured on CCTV, yet still the perpetrators at large. We'll have all the latest live from Edinburgh. And finally, some great news for Italy as they plan an offshore containment centre in Albania to send the illegals straight offshore for processing. Isn't that a great idea? Should we be doing the same? All of that and more to come. course, this is your show. Please get in touch. gbviews@gbnews.com, especially on Armistice Day. Should we ban those protests and the disgrace of Jim Henderson, the army vet, shoved around the poppy seller by protesters? Let us know what you think. All of that, get in touch. But first, here's your news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Martin, thank you and good evening to you. Well, our top story from the GB newsroom is that the Labour leader has criticised the first King's speech to Parliament in 70 years by saying the only fight left in the government is the fight for their own skin. Earlier, King Charles outlined the Prime Minister's legislative agenda for the year ahead amid traditional pomp and ceremony. The speech included measures on tougher sentencing for murderers and a ban on leaseholds for new houses in England and Wales. Sir Keir Starmer said the Conservatives were severing Britain's future.
Today was a missed opportunity. We needed a King's speech that would draw a line under 13 years of Tory decline, a King's speech for national renewal and a serious plan for growth. But instead, we have a party so devoid of leadership, it is happy to follow a Home Secretary who describes homelessness as a lifestyle choice.
Well, the Prime Minister hit back, saying measures announced in the King's speech will change the country for the better.
This King's speech is about what this government is about, taking long-term decisions to build a brighter future for our country. It builds on foundations that were far stronger than they were just a year ago. Inflation falling and on track to be halved.
Rishi Sunak, well, away from the Commons, Wales's First Minister says WhatsApp messages between Welsh Government officials relating to the pandemic may have been deleted. Mark Drakeford was answering questions after messages on the platform between ministers at Westminster emerged at the COVID inquiry. There's been controversy in Scotland too, as the former First Minister there, Nicola Sturgeon, and her message data has also been deleted. Mr Drakeford answered questions on the matter in the Senate.
A fairer way of putting it is that deletion may have taken place. I know in my case I've never had any deletion arrangements on the phone because I would have no idea how to make it happen. But I don't use WhatsApp either. I think what I don't want to say is that they were not some people working in the Welsh Government and working on COVID who didn't have pre-existing arrangements which continued after COVID began.
Mark Drakeford. Now, the government is due to hold an emergency COBRA meeting to discuss the impact of the Israel-Hamas conflict on the UK. Today marks a month since the October the 7th Hamas terror attack on Israel. And hundreds of people gathered outside Downing Street earlier as London joined major cities around the world holding a memorial vigil for those who've died in the conflict. Meanwhile, Israel's defence forces have released footage of the destruction of a tunnel in Gaza, which they say was a Hamas structure. It says its forces have now surrounded Gaza City, also saying they've hit Hamas mortar shell launchers overnight, as well as attacking Hamas targets from the sea. Meanwhile, video has been released of Palestinians holding white flags walking south in Gaza City, the Israeli military saying they have allowed them to move to safety. Here, Captain Sir Tom Moore's daughter has lost her appeal against the demolition of a spa built without planning permission in the grounds of her home. Hannah Ingram Moore and her husband had appealed against the demolition order handed down by Central Bedfordshire Council. The Captain Tom Foundation name was on the first planning proposal, with revised plans later turned down. The organisation, which was founded in June 2020 to honour Sir Tom, is currently being investigated by the Charity Commission. UK house prices rose for the first time in 6 months last month, marking the first monthly increase since March. According to the Halifax, the average house price jumped by around £3,000. The mortgage lenders saying prices rose by about 1% on average, compared to a fall of 0.3% in September. A typical UK home was valued at almost £282,000. Now, a breakthrough drug is being offered to thousands of women in England to reduce their risk of developing breast cancer. The NHS says around 300,000 postmenopausal women in England who are at moderate or high risk will be offered the drug. It's called anastrozole, and trials have shown the drug reduces breast cancer by 49% over 11 years among eligible women. That was the news. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
And thanks for that, Polly. So to our top story this hour, the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition have clashed over what was revealed in the King's speech earlier today. King Charles set out the government's plans for the coming year, which included higher jail terms for serious offenders and a plan to stop children from smoking. When debating the speech, Rishi Sunak told the Commons that his government was about taking long-term decisions to build a brighter future for this country. But the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, accused the Prime Minister of putting party first and the country second in the plans set out in that speech. Well, joining us now is our political editor, Christopher Hope. Hello to you again, Chris. So all this fur was flying as usual. Starmer saying Britain is ready for change. This is not a government that's even pretending to govern anymore. Rishi hit back, saying a future Labour government will mean more strikes, more inflation, more immigration and closer ties to the EU. What were your takeaways from today?
What a dreadful choice you're presenting, Martin. They might be more positive about it. But yeah, that's right. I mean, clearly for me, this King's speech was one of 21 bills long. A quarter of those were about criminal justice. That's an area which the government thinks they've got a good story to tell. Crime is down, apart from shoplifting and other small areas, but mainly it is down, the ONSA. So they want to boast about that and talk about that. New measures there to mean that life will mean life for the most serious criminals. But notably, if you get a sentence of less than 12 months in prison, you won't go to prison. That'll be a suspended sentence. That is a problem for the Tory party, given its reputation on crime, and whether it can survive that under pressure from Labour, we'll wait and see. Other measures I think interesting, new measures to try and tackle domestic and economic, complex and economic crime. Also allowing victims to ensure that criminals do hear their sentence in court. Previously, we saw with Lucy Letby, didn't we, earlier this year, how she avoided hearing her sentence in court. That annoyed lots of victims. Other measures too about the Victim and Prisoners Bill, that will ensure that the parole system is tightened up, so that if very dangerous criminals can't just walk out because a parole board says so, ministers can step in. I think it was an attempt here to grasp back the agenda for Rishi Sunak. I see it as the first of a two-act play, really, here in Westminster. This is the long-term vision going beyond their next election, but the real meat, I think, will come in the autumn statement in 2 weeks' time. That's when we might see some leg, if there's enough fiscal headroom, for tax cuts, and that's what I think Mrs Sunak wants to get towards. But the fact they've got these 21 bills, they want to push them through before the next election, that for me says the first time it's a real signal, I think, from Number 10 that they are now looking at going long, maybe into January 2025 for the next general election. That's what's so interesting, I think, about the scale of what Mrs Sunak has done. The criticism we heard, didn't we, from other critics saying that it's quite a thin legislative programme. Well, it was quite thin back in 2014. That was the last time we had a guaranteed election date of 2015. Well, the election must be held by January 2025. So I think that's why he is doing what he can to try and cement a kind of Sunakian legacy, if there is going to be one. But in other areas too, there will be measures. There's things that aren't in there. We haven't seen any measures to crack down on charities giving out tents to homeless people. I've had it on very senior authority just quite recently that could well come back in the criminal justice bill, because they are looking at doing measures to cut down, I should say, or giving police powers to cut down on aggressive begging and that sort of thing. So that hasn't gone away completely, but there are areas which aren't there. But generally, I think this is what they could do, given the time allowed, and also some measures are hangover from the last parliamentary session.
And Chris, a crackdown on crime, especially violent crime and murder, a crackdown on grooming gangs, that will play well with the Tory faithful, as no doubt will divergence from net zero. Let's drill for Britain and reduce energy bills by up to £15,000 per person in total, he said. Also, a ban on zombie knives. But the question is this a zombie parliament? Is there enough in this to turn the tide, or is there enough time even to turn this around, or do you think this is basically too little too late from Rishi?
Well, he's done what he said he'd do. He's restored the calmness in the markets after the chaos of the Liz Truss government about 14 months ago. Now he's trying to set out what he can do in the next 12 months. This is why I think the idea of a May-June election is now disappearing, and we're looking now into late next year. As I say, as far as January 2025, that idea was not denied by Oliver Dowden, who's the Deputy Prime Minister, in weekend interviews. And I wonder whether that's where the government's going, because they want to try and give as much time as they can to try and allow for any tax cuts in the March budget next year, to allow for the Rwanda plan to work on small boats, if it can work. Of course, numbers are down by 20% because of a deal with Albania, but that's it so far. They're trying to build a record of delivery from Rishi Sunak. But of course, if you go quite long into next year, you're stuck with events. You can't go any further than January. We could be in the middle of an NHS winter flu crisis. Other things might happen which they can't get round. So the one power he's got really is when he goes to the country to try and renew this Tory administration, this Tory government. I think he's going to go long next year, Martin, to buy the time for the plan set out today.
Chris Hope from Westminster, thank you very much. I totally agree. I always felt this baby was going to go full term, a January 2025 election. At the moment, what Tory would vote, what Turkey would vote for Christmas. That's what I think is going to go all the way. Moving on now. Also in the King's Speech, plans to introduce a law to stop children who turn 14 this year and those younger from ever legally buying cigarettes or tobacco in England. Yet, following on from Rishi Sunak's announcement back at the Conservative Party conference, the government plans to prevent those born in 2009 or later from ever buying tobacco products in a law emulated in many ways from down under in New Zealand. Well, I'm joined now by Simon Clark, Director of Forest, which is a smokers' rights organisation, to talk about this. So thanks for joining us on the show, Simon. The first thing I would say to you is this. How would this be policed? It seems entirely arbitrary that somebody who's born in 2009 can never buy fags, and somebody born a day before can buy them for life.
Well, absolutely. And of course, in 10 years' time, you'll have somebody who's aged 24 will be prohibited from buying cigarettes, and somebody who's a few days older, aged 25, will be allowed. Another 10 years on from that, a 34-year-old won't be able to buy cigarettes, but a 35-year-old will, and it'll continue. I think what will actually happen is that even the anti-smoking lobby in 10 years' time will say, look, this is an absolutely farcical situation. People are having to produce ID when they're in their mid-30s in order to buy cigarettes. So, of course, at that point, the anti-tobacco lobby won't say, oh, let's repeal this law. They'll say, let's go to the next logical step, as they see it, and let's just ban the sale of cigarettes to all age groups. So no adult will be able to smoke. I mean, this is the worst form of nanny state regulation because it treats consenting adults like children. Now, in my opinion, if you're old enough to vote, drive a car, join the army and buy alcohol, you're plenty old enough to buy cigarettes and other tobacco products.
Now, Simon, of course, those who support this, including Rishi Sunak, and it was interesting to see how Keir Starmer said that this policy would get his vote. So we seem to have a unanimous take on this across all of the parliamentary groups. They would say that smoking damages the health of the nation and it costs us a lot of money, of course. But my point to you would be this. Prohibition has never worked. It didn't work with alcohol in the 1920s. In fact, it drove serious crime, it drove contraband, and in this instance, surely, it would lead to a black market in cigarettes. If a government can't stop illegal immigrants getting into the country, how on earth would it stop illegal cigarettes getting into the country?
Yeah, absolutely. By declaring war on tobacco like this, it's going to drive future generations of adult smokers to the black market, as you say. I mean, it's not going to stop people smoking. It's not even going to stop children smoking, because the reality is, We already have laws in place that are designed to stop people under the age of 18 buying cigarettes. So why do we need any new laws? What we've got to do is enforce existing laws. Let's give trading standards officers more money so they can have more officers on the beat, checking out illicit traders, checking out shops that are illegally selling to people under 18. We certainly don't need a new law. And as for Keir Starmer supporting this, I mean, it's absolutely hilarious that we've got a major policy being introduced by a Conservative Prime Minister, and he's going to need the support of Labour MPs in order to get this through Parliament, because there are a lot of Conservative MPs who are very concerned by this policy. The Tories have always stood for freedom of choice and personal responsibility, and this policy completely U-turns on that, because, as I say, it treats adults like children, and they're going to be treated like children forevermore. And people have to ask themselves, and non-smokers have to ask themselves, what's going to be next? Because we know the public health lobby never stops. They're always looking for the next logical step. And the next logical step will be to introduce similar restrictions on vaping, maybe not now, but certainly in a few years' time. They're going to tighten the laws on buying alcohol. They're going to target junk food. I mean, this is just absolutely relentless. And ultimately, people have to stand up and say, enough is enough. Once you're an adult, once you're 18, an adult in the eyes of the law, you must be allowed to make decisions about your own lifestyle and about your own health. This is not a public health issue. It's a private health issue.
OK, Simon Clark, Director of Forests, thank you for that impassioned defence. Superb stuff. OK, now, like the smoking ban, the proposal to award licences for oil and gas projects in the North Sea annually has been controversial. The government hopes that the policy will enhance the UK's energy strategy and draw a political dividing line with the Labour Party. Well, join me now is the Shadow Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Steve Reid. Steve, hello to you, mate. You're always a great sport on this. So the fur was flying in the Commons earlier. Your leader saying that the Tory party is a party that doesn't even want to govern. It's not even pretending to govern anymore. What were your takeaways from today's speech in Parliament, and in particular this idea of drilling for energy security being central to Rishi's strategy, whereas Sir Keir Starmer seems to basically think we should just stop oil?
Well, first of all, looking at the package as a whole, I think all of us were astonished. And I'll say this on both sides of the House, really, at just how little there was in there. We've got a country crying out for change, and yet the government opening up this legislative agenda for the final term of Parliament, and there's practically nothing in there. This is Rishi Sunak's first ever King's Speech, his first chance to show us who he is, and perhaps in a way he did show us who he is and what he stands for, because there's nothing here, literally nothing. You could get this legislation through Parliament in a few weeks, and then we could get the general election. Well, if that's all he's interested in doing, let's do it, because change is clearly not going to come from this failed Conservative government. It can only come with the general election and the election of a Labour government focused on a decade of national renewal. Now, on the point you make about the oil and gas licences, the Conservatives are saying they're going to keep giving more licences to drill North Sea oil. What Labour's saying is we won't take away any of the licences that have been given, but we need to move away from fossil fuels, from oil and gas, which have proved themselves so insecure, so expensive. They're the reason that household bills have gone up so high. If we really want to cut people's household energy bills, we have to transition to more sustainable forms of energy that we can develop here at home in the UK. Take back control of our energy, if you like, with wind, wave, solar, nuclear, no longer dependent on foreign tyrants like Vladimir Putin for our energy, but we make our own here at home, and it costs less. And perhaps the worst thing about what the Conservatives have said is their own energy secretary has admitted it would not take, their plans would not knock a single penny off household energy bills, because whether you drill the oil in the North Sea or whether it's imported from further afield, it costs the same because the energy prices are set globally. So not a penny in savings, further pumping out emissions that will damage our work to address climate change, but perhaps worst of all for the British people, no dent in their household bills. They'll keep paying record prices prices until we get a Labour government committed to taking back control of energy and making more of our own energy right here at home in the UK.
Steve, a few people might be smiling at home to hear you say take back control. And in fact, I've heard Sir Keir Starmer saying take back control. Of course, for 3 years, he headed up the People's Vote campaign to cancel Brexit. And one of the things that Rishi Sunak threw out today was that a Labour government means closer ties to the EU. It means accepting 100,000 more immigrants per year from the quota, the returns quota with the EU. And it means closer alignment back with the European Union. What do you say to that?
Well, you know, the referendum is done. We've left the European Union. Brexit happened. We have to make Brexit work, which has been something this Conservative government has failed to do. You know, one of the things they promised us was that, you mentioned immigration there, that they would cut immigration if they had control. Actually, illegal immigration has gone up by record amounts since we left the European Union, because the Conservatives have lost control of our borders. So they say these things, but they don't have a clue how to deliver them. The only way that we're going to get the change that people are crying out is to switch to a Labour government. And on our relationships with the European Union, you know, I in my current role, Shadow Environment Secretary, I represent farmers and the farming community. They're currently not able to export good quality, high quality British meat to their European customers anymore in the way that they were promised they would, because this Conservative government won't agree a veterinary agreement that will allow our good British meat through into those European markets. Now, why should farmers be left out of pocket because of this government's broken promises and incompetence?
Okay.
Labour will prioritise getting that agreement so British farmers can sell their products across Europe, and that benefits farmers and it benefits our country.
Steve, that sounds like that you'd be proposing a fresh farming deal with the EU.
No, you just have to do it through a veterinary agreement. That's what the farmers are crying out for. No one's going to renegotiate the withdrawal agreement. It comes up for review in 2025 anyway. We clearly need to lower trade barriers that are damaging British industry, stopping British producers selling their goods to our nearest neighbours, that vast continent right on our doorsteps. Why would you tie the hands of British producers behind their backs? It's one of the ways the Conservatives have slowed economic growth. We've had one of the worst decades for economic growth in our history, and that's led to the worst decade for wage growth since the Great Depression in the 1930s. If you want to make work pay, if you want to put more money in British people's pockets, then you've got to grow the economy, and one way we can do that is take down the chains that the Conservatives have put on British manufacturers and producers.
OK, Steve Reid, thanks for joining us. Take back control of how cold and dark it is, maybe get to the Red Lion for a quick jaw. OK, you're watching and listening to GB News. Plenty more to come in just a tick. I'm Martin Dalby on GB News, and this is Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best.
Bellissima.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Put in your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back. Now, the government's emergency COBRA meeting is currently meeting to consider the domestic impact of the hostilities in the Middle East. Deputy Prime Minister is chairing the meeting, which is expected to discuss the planned pro-Palestinian March, which coincides this year, of course, with Armistice Day. Well, this comes as the Metropolitan Police say the march is inappropriate and risks violence. But human rights body Amnesty International has called for the government to prevent a ban on Saturday. Well, joining me now is Stuart Crawford, political commentator and former SNP member. Thanks for joining us on the show. So there's lots of tensions around this, Stuart, especially today, as it emerged in the Telegraph that half of the groups organising this march have links to Hamas. With that in mind, do you think the march should be banned?
Good evening, Martin. It's a difficult question, actually, very difficult for the government. Difficult for the Metropolitan Police Force and difficult for me to answer in many ways. I'm a great believer in freedom of expression, as long as it doesn't call for harm being visited on others. And I think that while I quite understand the calls for the march to be banned, I think that all the options for deconflicting the march from other activities should need to be explored first. And we have to sort of differentiate between the pro-Palestinian demonstrations on a Saturday and the Remembrance parade past the Cenotaph on Sunday. As I understand it, on neither of those days do the pro-Palestinian demonstrators plan to march down Whitehall, so that has to be taken into consideration as well. However, if I may just say that the problem with the large demonstrations being planned is that nobody has overall control of the many and varied groups which will turn up. And we know that there is an element in society, call it rent a mob, call it what you like, who will turn up and not really care what the occasion is, as long as it provides them with an opportunity to confront the police and cause mischief. So it's a difficult one, and made more difficult by the possibility that far-right groups will come up and counter-demonstrate. So the Met Police has got a major headache to deal with.
You're talking about the mob being uncontrollable. That brings me quite neatly to my next point, where you are now in Edinburgh. On Saturday, we saw Jim Henderson, a 78-year-old army veteran, shoved around selling poppies. He claims, allegedly, he was punched and the crowd was shouting at him. They blamed it on the British government, the British people, the Jews. How does that make you feel? This mob getting out of control, taking out their frustrations unfairly on an army veteran who served this country, simply trying to raise money for the Royal British Legion?
Well, as you'd expect, as an army veteran myself, I think it's just appalling, and there's no excuse for it whatsoever. I think the people who are demonstrating have to remind themselves that the reason they can do so is because people like Jim Henderson were prepared to go and do their bit, wherever that may have been, to protect the liberties that we enjoy in a free liberal democracy. And for him to be pushed around and possibly punched and assaulted is totally unacceptable. And it just shows that people have lost, or some people have lost, all sense of proportion in expressing their views.
And as far as the apprehension of these thugs, Stuart, the CCTV footage is clear as a bell. It was on the front page of many national newspapers today. Would you back the swift apprehension of these thugs?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think that there's any doubt that the police, who may have become soft in their approach over the past 10, 20 years, need to take off the kid gloves when dealing with reprobates like those who may have assaulted a 78-year-old man just doing his bit for Remembrance Sunday. So I'm very much of the opinion that the police have to take the kid gloves off, as I said, and deal with these people robustly but fairly.
Stuart Crawford, thank you for joining us on GB News. That's a forthright opinion, and one I'm sure many people out there will heartily agree with. You are watching and listening to GB News. Still to come, Italy's migrant plan will see asylum seekers sent to clearance centres offshore in Albania. And could that be the way for the UK to go? But first, here's your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
The headlines this hour, Sir Keir Starmer says the only fight left in the government is the fight for their own skin. The Labour leader was speaking shortly after the King's speech earlier on today, which included tougher sentencing for criminals and a ban on leaseholds for new houses in England and Wales. Meanwhile, Wales's First Minister says WhatsApp messages between Welsh Government officials relating to the pandemic may have been deleted. There's also been controversy in Scotland with the former First Minister there, Nicola Sturgeon, and her message also deleted from WhatsApp. And the government's holding an emergency Cobra meeting right now regarding the impact of the Israel-Hamas conflict on the UK. And today marks a month since the October the 7th Hamas terror attack on Israel. Hundreds of people gathered outside Downing Street earlier for a memorial vigil for those who've died in the conflict. Those are the headlines. More on our website by heading to gbnews.com.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Quick snapshot of the markets for you, and the pound buying you $1.2279 and €1.1497 euros. The price of gold is £1,599 and 47 pence an ounce. And the FTSE 100 has closed today at 7,410 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And thank you, Polly. Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Martin Dalby on GB News, standing in for Patrick Christys, who's having a well-earned break, bringing you all of the latest news, debate and analysis right through until 6 o'clock. Now, a load of you have been getting in touch with your views on the main topics of the day. Let's kick off with Howard, who says this: how on earth is a former Hamas chief able to live in this country? And if there's proof that he's organising a protest for Saturday, why is he not being arrested? Howard, everybody out there probably agrees with you. Mike says this: the government and the police are getting this wrong. If the march on Sunday disrupts, that's actually Saturday, disrupts the Remembrance Parade, it will put relations back in this country by 50 years. And I think a lot of people would agree that's why this shouldn't be allowed to go ahead, or certainly anywhere near the cenotaph. Richard says this: after the King's speech, Keir Starmer spouting his garbage simply means that he promises everything but delivers nothing. If you want even higher taxes, more wasting of public funds, the unions running the country and the country going bankrupt, then vote Labour. You should speak your mind a bit more, mate. Sitting on the fence, a bit like Sir Keir Starmer. Natasha says this: more Martin Daubney as a presenter, please. Natasha, is that your mum or the missus? Anyway, he's moderate but asks no-nonsense questions on the topics the BBC fails to cover. Thank you very much. The cheque is in the post. Now, moving on. Italy are set to build 2 centres in Albania, housing tens of thousands of illegal migrants. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni says they are due to be up and running next spring and process up to 36,000 migrants a year. But the plan will only apply to migrants rescued at sea by Italian boats. Well, joining me now is Italian political commentator Paola Diana, a friend of the show. This seems like common sense. It's almost like if you stop people coming to your country, you can take them offshore. In this case, a deal with Albania. I want to ask you this. How come Italy are able to do this? You're a member of the European Union. You're a member of the European Court of Human Rights. You can do it. Yeah, when we try and do it, we're not allowed.
I know. What Giorgia Meloni just did is remarkable. And we know she was planning it since last summer when she met the Albanian Prime Minister when she was on holiday. Mm-hmm. She kept it silent because she knew that eventually the far left in Europe would have not let her do that. But we know that what she's doing is right, because she's really saving Italians from this horde of illegal migrants that are coming every day on the island.
And in terms of the actual mechanics of it, there are 2 centres. Italy is paying for them to be built, but the security will be organised by Albania. Presumably there'll be some kind of exchange of money. But, you know, we pay £500 million to France every year. That doesn't seem to have any impact in the UK. We spend £8 million a day on hotels. That doesn't seem to have any impact. My question to you is this. How has this been received by the Italian public? Because Meloni was elected on a ticket also of stopping the boats.
Absolutely. Well, the Italian public loves Giorgia Meloni. We see the percentage of likelihood of her party rising constantly. So we know the majority of the people in Italy are fed up about these illegal migrants coming every day. And we also know that the far left, parties, they are criticising with just...
Yeah. Give us an indication, if you can, Paola, about the numbers coming to Italy. And have you seen a change in the fabric of Italian society, or a change, for example, in crime, things like that? How impactful has the numbers been on Italy?
Well, we know that last year in Italy there arrived 159,000 illegal migrants from Africa to Lampedusa. That is a huge number. And we also know that, unfortunately, to be politically correct, we can't even say that certain crimes are committed by a certain type of people. We know that, of course, Italians, they can commit crime as well, but there are certain types of crimes like rape or burglary that eventually, or drug as well, that are committed by poor people who come and they have no other means. We want to help as much as we can, but we can't realistically help the whole poor people coming from Africa. It's impossible.
And you mentioned about resistance from the far left. We see a similar thing in the UK. Do they say the same things here? It's like you're racist if you oppose this, that you're against multiculturalism, you're a bad person. How febrile, how poisonous is this debate in your country?
It's not that poisonous nowadays, thankfully, because I think Italians reach a certain level of understanding of the subject. So I'm sure in the UK, eventually in the future, people will understand as well. And we know that they're concerned about security. So it's not about being ideological or being racist. It's just wanting to be secure and safe in our country.
Now, Rishi Sunak has been courting, not literally courting, Giorgia Meloni in terms of her ideas, talks of a partnership about how the UK could learn from this. But there seems to be a bit of a lack of political will, or there's resistance from the lawyers, from the charities, from the NGOs. What would you say to Rishi Sunak? What would you say to the British public? What do we learn, and why should we hold our reserve and push on with a plan like Meloni's?
I think Rishi Sunak should go on with this plan. And if it's not possible to do it in Rwanda, let's choose another country. Albania, as an example, Tunisia or Libya. Find the way, because there are many countries who need the money to boost their own economy, and they're happy to create these centres. And also we can use artificial intelligence to start processing the asylum demands much quicker.
Superb, that's a great thing. OK, Paladiana, thank you for joining us today on GB News. I wonder what you think out there, because Rishi Sunak has been saying for a long time he wants to stop the boats. Maybe offshore containment in Albania is the answer. If the Italians can do it, why can't we? OK, moving on now. A Scottish poppy vendor in Edinburgh was the alleged victim of an assault on Saturday after an anti-war protest occupied Edinburgh's Waverley Station. 78-year-old Jim Henderson was reportedly pushed and punched as he tried to pack up the Poppy Scotland stall after protesters swarmed into the station. To tell us more on this concerning story, one that's really upset a lot of people out there, is our Scotland reporter, Tony Maguire. So, Tony, this happened on Saturday. The CCTV images have been splashed all over the front pages of many newspapers. The first question I've got for you is, has anybody been apprehended for this yet?
Well, that's a very, very good question, Martin, and certainly it was the first thing that I thought when I looked back at this story a little earlier today. I'd reached out to British Transport Police and so far haven't heard anything concrete, but given the outcry, given the sheer way that so many people have reacted to this situation on Saturday, 78-year-old Jim Henderson, he was essentially attacked, allegedly, here in Waverley Station after being pushed. Someone had stood in his foot, he told the Daily Mail, and then he was punched twice as he was trying to clear up his stall. Certainly, I've spent a wee bit of time here today in and around the station, particularly up in the Garden of Remembrance here in Edinburgh, talking to people, and they are quite shocked. One person I spoke to, well, he said he had actually bought his poppy off him and on Friday, and another had come out and said that, you know, he's quite often seen him standing with, you know, a tin collecting change. Now, Poppy Scotland, for who Mr Henderson was collecting from, he said that they had put out a statement today to say that, you know, while they respect the rights of people who protest within the law, that the safety and welfare of volunteers is of their paramount concern. They also added that he is safe and well and would like to extend their thanks to the 3 station staff members who actually helped him get away. That's right, of the hundreds of people that were there at the moment of the incident, it took 3 station staff to help Mr Henderson clear the area.
OK, Tony Maguire live in Edinburgh. Thank you for that update on that concerning story. Let's hope somebody gets apprehended soon. You get loads more on that story on our website. And get this, gbnews.com is the fastest growing national website in the country, news website. It's got the best analysis and opinion, as well as all the latest breaking news. So thank you for helping it to be so successful. You're watching and listening to GB News. Still to come, multiple VAR checks saw 5 goals disallowed and 2 players sent off in the Spurs v Chelsea clash last night. Does that mean this technology is working, or is it time to kick VAR out of football? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Acquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 5:48. You're watching and listening to Martin Dalby on GB News, covering for Patrick Christys. Now, Tottenham's unbeaten start to the season came to a spectacular end last night as Chelsea ran away with a 4-1 drubbing. But once again, VAR took centre stage. After the game, Spurs boss Postecoglou questioned the officials' authority after 9 decisions. 9 were sent to the video referee. His frustration came after 2 of his players were sent off, with England's James Maddison and fellow new signing Mickey van der Ven going off injured. The game also saw 5 goals disallowed as Chelsea boss Pochettino. Tottenham return was topped off with a hat-trick from Blues striker Nicholas Jackson. Well, join me now is sports journalist Ben Jacobs. Ben, once again, we've got a football match where all we're talking about is VAR. 8 VARs, 21 minutes of stoppages. It was absolute bedlam. And where I watched this last night in a pub, everybody was complaining about VAR. Let's face it, it was meant to make the game to be less controversial. It's done the opposite. VAR needs to be kicked out of football.
Well, I think the funny thing about this is there were a lot of times where VAR was necessary, but it was also a very atypical Premier League game with plenty of drama. So some will say mayhem, some will say box office, but I don't think that VAR got anything wrong in the game necessarily. Perhaps the Romero, before he was sent off, leading to the penalty for Chelsea, should have gone originally, but then he ended up being sent off anyway. So Tottenham can't necessarily have too many complaints about either of the sendings off. But the big question is, as Ange Postecoglou said, is VAR too forensic? If we're getting to the right decision, but it's taking, for example, in that first half, 12 extra minutes, is that slowing down the game? And when people are standing around and waiting, do the managers, the players, the coaches, and of course the fans know what's going on inside the stadium? And if they don't, then VAR might come to the right decision, but at the expense of the rhythm and the speed of the game. And I think that that was Postecoglou's point. Not that VAR got anything wrong, but that we're being too forensic, and as a consequence, it's slowing down the game.
It's certainly true to say that sometimes watching Premier League football now feels like watching NFL. There are so many breaks, but there are clear instances, Ben, where VAR has got it spectacularly wrong. The Newcastle-Arsenal match recently, there were 3 clear areas, it seemed, to everybody watching that, apart from the VAR guys. The ball was out of play. There was a shove in the back. The Liverpool-Spurs offside. Klopp called that embarrassing. There are simply too many errors now, no real transparency, and yet who are the people that are doing it? Because it seems they don't really understand the sport.
Well, what you have is somebody in the VAR room, and it's being overseen by Howard Webb. And I think, again, Postecoglou last night and others like Mikel Arteta, as you referenced, have stated that everything's in the hands of somebody miles away in a video assistance room. And even if they come to the right decision, it's too slow, it's too painful, and maybe the rhythm of the game should allow the control for the referee on the field, even if a mistake is made, because football ultimately is in the eyes of the referee, and that's what we're used to. So actually, the Newcastle goal against Arsenal fans and Mikel Arteta will say is wrong because of the 3 things that you mentioned. But if you actually look at it in real time, it's impossible to tell whether the ball was out. That was the first one because the ball is spherical. Then as it comes in, there is probably, in my opinion, a foul on Gabriel, but it's subjective, and then the offside with the angles available is too tight to call as well. So the more you look at that, the more you can argue that maybe VAR actually were not able to overrule the on-field decision, but in trying to, they were under pressure to get a decision made, and that's problematic. And there was no communication, and it took too long. So VAR can't win sometimes, because even if they get the right end result, if it takes too long and there's no clear communication, they're always going to get criticism. And again, it may go against the rhythm of the game that we're used to. So being right is one thing, but if it's at the expense of being stop-start, then that's not a good thing either.
Don't you miss the good old days, though, Ben, where we just argued about what the referees did?
Yes and no. I mean, the irony of this is there has been games this season where VAR has not been in play, where calls have seemingly been missed on the field, and there is the same level of criticism. So if you take VAR away, then there will be fans and managers that say, where was the technology? We've been robbed. And if you use the technology to the point where you're over forensic, then people will say that's too extreme as well. So we need a balance. But I think if you look at MLS, if you look at Australia, technology is used better. It's used with less panic. Sometimes the audio in sport is also shared in real time. We've seen that in Australia. I'm going to just call it soccer for the sake of it so as not to confuse people, but we've also seen it in American football, and we've seen it in rugby. So I think this is the confusion in all of this. Why is it so panicked? Why is it so time consuming when other sports are able to use this technology in a way that is more calmer and seemingly more effective?
OK, Ben Jagers will have to blow the full-time whistle on that, because I'm now joined in the studio by Michelle Dewberry. Jubes & Co, of course, massive show coming up. What's on the menu?
Definitely not football, I've got to say. Although I did watch that match last night, and it was a good one.
It was mayhem. It was bedlam.
Well, I've got to say, I did watch it, and some of it I heard, actually, rather than saw, because I was in the kitchen, and it was just drama after drama after drama after drama, sending off. It had it all, didn't it? Penalties. I'm not a massive football person, I've got to confess, but even I was quite into that game last night. But anyway, I'm not talking about that tonight. I've got that off my chest with you.
Good.
I've got a fascinating show coming up. I'm very excited about it, because it is a massive day today, of course, in UK Parliament, with the new agenda being set by the King. I'm wondering as well, do we even need all this kind of pomp and ceremony? We're apparently in a cost of living crisis. Of course, 1 month on from Gaza as well. My panel, Kelvin McKenzie, James Schneider, they don't agree on pretty much anything. It's going to be a lively one.
And that's why it's going to be a corker. OK, that's it from me today. I'm back tomorrow on the Patrick Christys Show. Jubes & Co right after this.
Hello again, I'm Alex Burkle with your latest GB News weather update. Whilst there have been quite a few showers around today, and there will be more to come this week, first we have a spell of wet and windy weather that's going to arrive overnight. That's coming from a frontal system currently waiting out in the Atlantic. We do have a brief ridge of high pressure trying to build across the UK, and that is going to ease and clear away some of the showers, with clear skies developing for a time during the start of the night. That will allow it to turn quite chilly, perhaps some patches of mist and fog, but then it will turn cloudy, wet and windy as this system makes its way in from the west. That will then lift temperatures, so after an initially chilly start to the night, it should be relatively mild when most people wake up on Wednesday morning, but it will be a wet and windy start for many of us. Heavy rain, particularly for western parts of Scotland and northwest England, but that rain does sweep its way eastwards as we go through the day, taking its time to clear parts of the east and southeast, so staying wet here well into the afternoon. Something drier, brighter following in behind, but also blustery showers for parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, and temperatures a little bit lower than today across northern parts, highs in single figures here. As we look towards Thursday, and it's another showery day, it will be breezy at times, particularly around the coast, and watch out for some heavy showers, particularly towards southern coastal areas too. The showers will continue as we go into Friday, starting to ease a little bit, and at the moment, Saturday does look like it will be drier, but no real change to our temperatures. Bye-bye.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.